The Revolve Surface tool has been updated and redesigned in Alias 2012. I'll start by looking at the Revolve surface structure. In the Revolve option window, you now have the same settings as you've been used to using in the Circle and Arc tools. You have full explicit control of the surface degree and number of spans, whereas before you were limited to degree 3. And you now have choice over the periodic setting. Ticking this on gives you the same multi-span surface structure as the old Revolve tool. Choosing non-periodic creates an open surface, which you'll typically use with a smaller sweep angle to get a controlled single span. And there's a new segment setting, which divides your sweep angle into several separate surfaces of equal size. Now, so far, all of these surfaces have been created with the rational setting off in the construction options. If that's turned on, you get the same surface structure and accuracy as you always got with the old Revolve tool. I'll start by looking at this wheel, and at the hub surfaces around these 5 bolt holes. And here I have a number of curves to define the shape. So I'll use the new Revolve tool and choose a global y-axis as before. But now I can use a box selection. And I can also continue to work with the control window open, so I can have the typical periodic surface as before, or I can choose non-periodic and either work interactively on the model to define the sweep angle, or numerically in the control window. If I now have a look at the outer rim curves, I can't use box select here because there are so many curves close together. But I now have chain select in the Revolve tool, which allows me to pick only one curve, and the whole tangent strip is selected. For this rim, I want to match the 7 spokes, and that's always a tricky division. But now I have a better method using the new Segments option. If I choose the full 360-degree sweep, and then ask the Revolve tool to create 7 segments, then each segment is a separate surface of exactly the right sweep angle. Now, the other thing that's important with this wheel rim is accuracy. So I can now go back into the control window and check first the continuity between the segments, but then I'm concerned with the radial accuracy as well. So if I now take a look at just one of these surfaces, you'll see that I've got a nice quality single-span surface. And if I now measure the radial accuracy, it's pretty good. But if I want to improve on this to get, for example, full A-class quality, then I can go back into the construction history and modify the settings. And I find that degree 6, single-span surface, tends to give me the most accurate results. So now my accuracy and surface quality are spot on. This new level of interaction and control is the main development in the new Revolve tool. But there have also been important additions to the way in which the axis is defined. We have the same settings as before for the position of the axis. Local uses the pivot point of a curve or group, and global uses the grid origin. And the axis direction is the same as before, except that now you can interactively switch between the axes using construction history. There's a new option to use a vector as the axis, and the original green manipulator is still available. And finally, from any Revolve surface that you create, you can capture the axis as a separate vector. So first, I'll have a look at the global and local settings. If I go back to the wheel, I use the global setting for the rim surfaces, which means that when I move the curves, the surface shape changes, because the center of rotation stays at the origin. I have a different requirement for the 5 bolt holes around the center of the wheel. Here I have 2 separate curves, and I need an axis which is away from the grid origin on this line. So first I need to group the 2 curves together so that I can set a single pivot point where I want the axis of rotation to be. And now, in the Revolve tool, If I switch from global to local, it uses that pivot point instead of the global origin. And the main difference to global is that the axis stays with the curves when I move them, so the revolved shape stays exactly the same. Next, I'll have a look at the new vector options. If I'm working on angled geometry like this hairdryer handle, I can now create a vector from the construction palette and use this as an explicit axis. If it's already selected, then the Revolve option window shows it as picked, and I just have to pick the curve to create the revolved surface around that vector axis. And now, if I pick the vector and move it, the revolve axis is moved and the surface shape changes accordingly. And if I move the vector and the curve together, then the surface shape stays the same, and the construction history is maintained. And if I take the shading off, it works really well if I'm trying to match this side of the sketch, and I need to experiment to find the right position for the axis. I can also use vectors to extend the use of local mode. Here on the main body, I can choose the main curve and use the local pivot. And it may be that I want to explore the shape interactively using the green manipulator. But once I have a shape that I like, then I can capture that axis as a vector entity using the Retain Vector button. And this vector that has been created can be used, for example, to export the axis definition to another CAD system. But it's now also taken over from that pivot point as the axis of the revolve, and we've still kept the construction history. And to extend the use of that axis, the new Revolve tool now allows me to add and remove curves into the revolve set at any time using the construction history. So now they're all following that same local axis vector. And the construction history with the new Revolve is really robust. If, for example, I create a fillet blend here between the handle and the body, I can still explore variations in the revolved surface design, and all the geometry will be updated each time. So the Revolve surface in Alias 2012 allows for complete control over the surface structure, making it possible to achieve A-class surfaces quickly. And there's now consistency with the other circle and arc tools. You can now use and create vectors, making it much easier to work at an angle. And the improved construction history makes it easy to switch between different axis choices. And finally, Chain Select and Box Select will significantly speed up your workflow and make Revolve a much easier tool to work with.